There is a word for men like Harlan Goss. In Holt County, Texas, they used it freely. At the feed store, at the co-op, in the parking lot of the savings and loan. The word was fool. For 22 years they called him that. The dealer called him that. The county called him that. His own neighbors, the men who brought him their broken machines and then drove home shaking their heads, called him that. He never argued. He just went back into the barn. Holt County sits in the dry middle of West Texas, where the soil is pale caliche and the wind comes flat off the plains with nothing to stop it. In 1971, the county ran on 400 working farms. Cotton, grain sorghum, 2 grain elevators, a feed mill, and 1 equipment dealership, Briggs & Son Farm Equipment, run by a man named Stanton Briggs. Stanton drove a 1969 Buick Electra, white, tan interior, washed every Thursday. He parked it directly in front of his showroom window so it caught the morning light. He wore short-sleeve button-downs with a pen clipped in the pocket. He shook hands like a man who wanted to win the handshake. He was the only equipment dealer in 3 counties. He knew it. He made sure you knew it too. Harlan Goss was 53 years old and had farmed 280 acres on the west side of the county since 1948. 3rd generation on the same dirt. Same plain white farmhouse with the bad front porch step nobody ever fixed. The farm had one feature every other farmer in Holt County considered worthless: a dry wash. A long, flat-bottomed gully along the north boundary, carved by a creek that had given up before the Depression and never come back. 15 feet deep, crumbling caliche walls, mesquite and rattlesnakes. Harlan's father had used it as a dump. 11 dead machines were already down there when Harlan took over. 2 Alice Chalmers WC tractors from the 40s, a grain drill frame, assorted plows, iron ghosts sinking into the pale ground. Most men would have called the scrapper. $6 a ton. Done. Harlan did the opposite. It started with a neighbor named Dub Ferris, 60 years old, cotton farmer. His Oliver 1800 had thrown a hydraulic pump, and Stanton Briggs had quoted him $94 for a replacement. Dub didn't have $94. Harlan heard about it Wednesday at the co-op. Drove to Dub's place that evening in his GMC, 64 model, army green, windshield crack since Johnson was president. "Don't scrap the Oliver," Harlan said. "Give it to me." "Harlan, the pump's gone." "I don't want the pump. I want 14 other things that still work fine." Dub shrugged. Hauling it to Harlan was easier than waiting for the scrapper. That Saturday, Harlan spent the day in the barn with a 1962 shop manual and his father's wrenches. Not tearing the Oliver apart, disassembling it. There's a difference. Every bolt came off in order. Every component came out clean. PTO shaft. Good. Masking tape. Grease pencil. Oliver 1800 PTO shaft. Good. OC 1971. Wall hook. Gauge cluster. Good. Coffee can. Label. Steering column. Water pump. Alternator. Starter motor. Brake drums. Wheel bearings. Each one cleaned. Each one labeled. Each one shelved. The carcass went into the wash. Frame on one side. Sheet metal stacked flat. Block upright next to his father's old machines. That was how it started. He didn't advertise. Word moved the way it always moves in farm country. Truck window to truck window. Fence line to feed mill. Harlan Goss is taking dead equipment. Anything you can't use, bring it out. Within 2 years, farmers across the township were pulling into his lane with broken machines, obsolete machines, machines that had weeds growing through the floorboards. An Alice D17 with a seized transmission, an Oliver 550 with a cracked manifold, 2 hay balers, 3 plows, a combine header so bent it looked apologetic. Harlan said yes to all of it. His wife Norma watched from the kitchen window and said nothing for almost a year, which was how Norma handled things she hadn't decided how to feel about. Then one October evening she came to the barn doorway with her arms crossed. "The Hendersons are calling this place the Junkyard." "I know. Does it bother you?" He set a can of brake shoes on the shelf, wrote the label. "Not particularly." Norma went back inside. But she opened a ledger of her own. An accountant's daughter cannot watch a flow of goods without tracking it. She recorded every part in and every part out. Date, recipient, part, price, estimated retail replacement cost. This habit would matter later. Considerably. By 1975, the barn held 847 cataloged parts. Oliver and Alice Chalmers were his specialty. Oliver had stopped producing the 1800 series in 1969. Parts were already getting scarce at dealers. Stanton stocked what manufacturers still made. Harlan stocked what they'd stopped making. Different markets. Neither had planned it. Stanton noticed anyway. Parts of his counter were having slow days in categories that shouldn't have slow days. Farmers who needed discontinued Oliver components weren't coming in. He started talking at the co-op. Not accusing, planting. Anyone driven past the Goss place lately? Stanton said one Saturday, hands around his coffee. I counted from the road. 14 equipment carcasses visible from the public right-of-way. I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying someone ought to think about zoning. 3 weeks later, an anonymous complaint arrived at the Holt County Planning Office. Unlicensed salvage operation. Environmental hazard. Request for inspection. Everyone knew who filed it. The county sent Vernon Mays, 58 years old, 3 years from retirement, deeply uninterested in controversy. Vernon stood at the edge of the wash, looked down at the organized rows of carcasses, frame sections on one side, sheet metal stacked, engine blocks lined up in the pale dust. I've got a complaint you're running a commercial salvage operation without a permit. I'm a farmer with a wash full of equipment other farmers gave me, Harlan said. He was standing beside Vernon with his hands in his pockets, showing no more concern than if they were discussing rain. I don't buy it. I don't advertise. I don't have a business license or a phone listing. If a neighbor needs something and I've got it, we work something out. That's not commerce. That's West Texas. Vernon looked at the barn, the shelves, the labeled cans visible through the open door. You've got more parts than Stanton Briggs stocks. Stanton stocks what they still make. I stock what they stopped making. Harlan paused. Different business, except I'm not a business. Vernon wrote 3 words on his clipboard, walked back to his truck, filed as no violation found. The junkyard name stuck anyway. These things always do. Now, Royce Pell. Royce was the head mechanic at Briggs & Son from 1971 until 1981. 34 years old when he started. Self-taught. 10th grade dropout. Forearms disproportionately large from years of torque work. Fingernails that never got entirely clean of grease regardless of how hard he scrubbed, a fact he'd stopped being embarrassed about around 1965. He could hear a problem in an engine. 10 seconds of idle, and he'd tell you which cylinder, which seal, which bearing was going. Stanton knew what he had. He just wasn't smart enough to keep it. The trouble started in 1973. A farmer named Cecil Ware came in needing a hydraulic lift seal kit for his Oliver 1800. Part number 158224A. Royce went to the parts room, checked the bins, checked the catalog. Discontinued. Oliver had stopped producing it 18 months earlier. He went to Stanton's office. Cecil Ware needs a 158-224A. It's discontinued. Stanton didn't look up. Tell him we'll order it. 6 to 8 weeks. From who? I just said it's discontinued. Royce, the particular patience of a man who resents explaining himself. Take his deposit. If the warehouse doesn't have it, the deposit comes back in 6 to 8 weeks. Standard procedure. Royce understood then. The deposit was the point. 60 days of float on $200 of money that was never going to become a part. Multiply that by every discontinued part inquiry in a year. He went back to Cecil Ware, looked him in the eye. 6 to 8 weeks, he said, and hated himself for it. That night he drove home past Harlan's Lane, slowed down, saw the barn light burning at 9 p.m., kept driving. Next morning Cecil came back. Couldn't wait 6 to 8 weeks. Harvest was coming. Royce picked up his jacket, told the other mechanic he was getting lunch. He drove to Harlan's farm. Harlan was in the barn. He was always in the barn. Oliver 1800 hydraulic lift seal kit, Royce said from the doorway. 158-224A. You got anything? Harlan set down his wrench, walked to the back shelf, 3rd row, right side, pulled a box labeled Oliver 1800, hydraulic seals, gaskets, opened it. Not the kit, individual seals, all 4. Same job, just longer to install. How much? $12. I'm going to send someone out here. Farmer named Cecil Ware, south end of the county. Harlan put the box on the counter. I'll be here. Royce drove back to the dealership, returned Cecil's deposit out of his own pocket, told him the order fell through. quietly told him to drive out to Route 41. He never told Stanton. That was the first time. Over the next 8 years, Royce Pell sent 26 farmers to Harlan's barn. Same method every time. Identify the problem. Confirm Stanton didn't have the part and was running the deposit game. Find a private moment. Point the farmer down Route 41. He never took a cent from Harlan. On 3 occasions when Harlan offered, Royce said, "I'm not doing it for money. Those farmers need the part and you've got it." That's the end of the math. For 8 years it worked because Stanton never noticed. The service department made money. The Buick got washed every Thursday. It ended in 1981 because of a farmer's wife. Gloria Tish came into Briggs & Son on an unrelated errand and mentioned to the woman at the counter how grateful she and Leroy were that Stanton's mechanic had sent them to that lovely salvage man out on Route 41. She thought it was a service Stanton offered. Stanton called Royce in at 4:45 on a Friday. Closed the door. "The Tish account," Stanton said. "You sent them to Harlan Goss." "I did." "How many others?" 26. The number sat in the room. 26 customers? 26 farmers who needed parts you didn't have and weren't going to get. Parts you were taking deposits on, knowing full well the warehouse was empty. Royce's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I've watched you do it with at least 40 accounts since I've been here. I know because I'm the one those farmers complain to when they come back. You work for me. I fix machines for you. That's different." Stanton opened his drawer, put an envelope on the desk. Royce picked it up, pocketed it. "You know what the difference between you and Harlan Goss is?" he said, standing. "He knows what every single part in that barn is worth, where it came from, and what condition it's in. Written down in a notebook going back 10 years. You know your float income on failed deposits. You're both running inventories. His is just honest." He picked up his jacket, drove home, called his wife. She said she thought he'd quit years ago. Monday morning he drove west on Route 41 past Briggs & Son without stopping, turned up the Caliche Lane. Harlan was in the barn. "Stanton let me go," Royce said from the doorway. "I know. Norma heard from Diane Ferris this morning." "News travels." Royce looked at the shelves. The coffee cans, the hooks, more organized than any parts room he'd ever worked in. "You need help in here?" "What are you good at?" "Oliver, primarily. Alice up to the 180 series. I've got the manuals for the rest." "I figured." Royce walked to the Oliver 1655, sitting half disassembled in the center of the barn floor, crouched down, looked at the hydraulic lines. "Your main lift cylinder O-ring is weeping. See that residue? And your return line fitting on the left has a hairline crack. Different color where the fluid dried. I've got O-rings. Don't have that fitting." "What size?" Harlan told him. "I've got one in my truck. Pulled it off a 1550 last year. Been carrying it because I knew eventually—" "Get it," Harlan said. Royce went to his truck, came back with the fitting, handed it over. Harlan checked the threads, nodded. "Monday," Harlan said. "I'm already here," Royce said, and picked up a wrench. The 1980s arrived in Holt County the way hard times always do. Not all at once, but in a series of events that each seemed survivable until none of them were. Interest rates hit 21.5%. Cotton prices collapsed. Land values dropped by half. 3 Holt County farms went to foreclosure in 1982. 7 more in 1983. 12 in 1984. The ones that survived did it by cutting everything cuttable. First thing they stopped buying, new equipment. Sales at Briggs & Son fell 44% between 1981 and 1983. By 1984, Stanton was selling 5 units a year where he'd sold 25. Service kept him alive briefly. Then farmers started doing their own repairs. The parts they needed were for machines 10, 15, 20 years old. Machines Stanton had long since stopped stocking parts for. He had no way to get them. For the first time in his career, the only equipment dealer in 3 counties was sitting behind his counter unable to help. August 1986. Stanton locked the showroom door, padlocked the service bay, put a handwritten sign in the window. Closed. Thank you for 24 years. The white Buick Electra sat out front for 3 days before anyone thought to move it. Nearest operating dealer, Maddox. 91 miles east. Stocked parts for current models only. Nothing for machines 15 years past their production run. Norma's phone started ringing the week Stanton closed. She kept a message pad next to it. Make, model, part number if they had it, description if they didn't, name, number. First farmer in person was Leroy Tisch. Tuesday morning, hat in both hands. Harlan, Alice 180 combined. Feeder house chain. Harvest is 11 days out. Maddox said 8 weeks minimum. Harlan looked at Royce. Royce was already moving. He went to the pole shed and came back 4 minutes later with a feeder house chain still in the brown paper he'd packed it in 2 years before. He set it on the workbench. Off a 74 Alice 180, compatible across the whole generation. Check your master link clip direction before you run it. Leroy turned it over. How much? $40. New, at a dealer that had one, if you could find one, $180. Leroy drove home and had his combine running by evening. That was Tuesday. 6 more farmers by end of week. 31 by end of September. By Christmas 1986, Harlan Goss and Royce Pell had supplied parts to 88 farmers across Holt County and 2 neighboring counties. Hydraulic seals, feeder chains, PTO shafts, steering cylinders, alternators, fuel injectors, brake components, parts pulled from machines sitting in that dry wash since Gerald Ford was president, cleaned and tested and ready. Norma's ledger for 1986, 214 parts out. Total revenue, $6,200. Average price, $28.97 per part. She also calculated replacement cost at retail. Average $174 per part. In 1 year, Harlan's barn had saved Holt County farmers an estimated $31,000. The Junkyard, as it turned out, was a bank. February 1994. A dark blue GMC Sierra came up the Caliche Lane on a Thursday morning. Clean truck, stood out in a place where everything wore the county's pale dust. Stanton Briggs got out. 64 now. Thinner. Canvas work jacket. Boots with actual dirt on them. He'd been farming his father's ground since the dealership closed. 300 acres of cotton, aging equipment, and no parts source within 90 miles. He walked to the barn door. Harlan came out, said nothing. Stanton looked at the shelves, the labeled coffee cans, the cardboard boxes with their grease pencil writing. 23 years of building? He'd called it an eyesore from the road. Filed the complaint that brought the county inspector. Hired an attorney. I need a steering cylinder, he said. Alice Chalmers 200 series. Harlan turned, walked to the second shelf, 4th row. Came back with a cylinder. Clean. Labeled in Royce's handwriting. He'd processed this one 18 months ago. He set it on the workbench between them. Stanton checked the fittings. His hands were steady. Give him that. How much? $30. Stanton counted out 3 tens, set them on the bench. Harlan picked them up, folded them, put them in his front pocket. Silence. A machine doesn't know who owns it, Stanton, Harlan said. It just knows whether someone took care of it. Stanton picked up the cylinder, held it for a moment. I know, he said quietly. He walked back to his truck, down the lane, left onto Route 41. Gone. Royce had watched from the pole shed doorway. He came over now. $30 is too cheap for that cylinder, he said. Should have been $45. I know, Harlan said. He went back to work. Harlan Goss died in 2004, 86 years old, 56 years on the same 280 acres. Never borrowed money for equipment. Never bought a new tractor. The dry wash held 79 carcasses organized by manufacturer. The inventory, 6,200 cataloged parts across 14 handwritten notebooks. Colt, his son, took over. Royce stayed, 67 years old, no interest in retirement. A reporter from the San Angelo Standard-Times came out in 2009. She spent 2 days photographing the wash, the shelves, the coffee cans. She asked Colt what his father would have thought of the article. He'd have read it once, put it in the drawer with the bills, and gone back to work. She asked what the most valuable thing in the barn was. Colt walked to the original shelf. First shelf his father built in 1971. Pulled down a coffee can. Faded grease pencil. Oliver 1800. PTO shaft. Good. Oct. 1971. First thing Harlan ever labeled. From Dub Ferris's donated Oliver. First morning of 22 years. The can was empty. The shaft had gone out long ago. But Harlan had kept the can. This, Colt said, not because of what it's worth. Because this is where one man decided that what everyone else was throwing away was worth keeping. He put it back. The rest is just math. The operation is still running. Colt's daughter May joined in 2019. Fourth generation. The wash is full. 3 storage buildings now. The catalog is digital. Colt keeps the handwritten backup anyway. Old habit. Every week someone drives up that caliche lane and asks for a part nobody else in West Texas can provide. The answer is almost always yes. Because in 1971, one man looked at a dead tractor and saw 40 parts instead of one problem. He spent 22 years collecting what everyone laughed at. The dealer filed complaints. The county sent inspectors. An attorney from Dallas drove 90 miles and accomplished nothing. The barn is still full. The parts are still labeled. And the farmers are still coming. That's what happens when a man trusts what he sees and doesn't need anyone else to see it first. If this story meant something to you, you already know someone who needs to hear it. Send it to them.